The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The stories in this podcast are not our own, but we are allowed to narrate them. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the Strange and Undecided podcast. I'm your producer and host, Jarret, joined by my co-hosts,
Brandon, Patrick.
So for tonight's episode, we're going to narrate some scary stories.
Yeah, I know it's my first time doing this, so I'm really excited.
All right, without further ado, let's begin.
The woman in the white dress. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it. It was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night at maybe 11 o'clock, I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel in danger. Plus, it was a pretty night. I had been walking for around 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair and a white dress caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked to be around my age too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. While I circled the block again, she was on the same street a couple feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb, staring at the cars passing by. It was a main road, so even late people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned her gaze to me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed at the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she just wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was some big hoax and a kid who didn't know what they were talking about and some guy who went along with it. The blood on the truck was brought back to the police station to investigate, only to be found as paint. Nothing else was put up about it. I'm still not sure if what happened was real, but I don't believe in the paranormal. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now, and I kind of feel like I'm going crazy. Has anyone else experienced something like this?
I was stalked while on a hockey trip. I'm a 13-year-old female, and it was only a few months ago when this happened. I was on a hockey trip with the rest of my family. I don't play, but my siblings do. I'm generally a quiet person. I have social anxiety and don't react well to situations with people complimenting me or anything. My family had just pulled into a rest stop I was already familiar with. I was walking in to go get a drink with my little sister who was 9 when she ran ahead of me. I didn't care much, but I wish she had stayed by my side because not even a few seconds later, a Caucasian man who looked to be in his mid-40s honked his horn at me. I instantly jumped back because I was right next to his car, which was a red 4-door sedan. He started telling me how pretty I was and how I should hop into his car. Being the unsocial person I am, I walked away with no reply. I ran inside to go meet up with my little sister. I'm pretty close with her, so I laughed about what just happened when I told her. We didn't think much of it, and left as soon as we came. The man made crude gestures to me as I walked back with my other siblings. I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. My brother is 16 and pretty intimidating, while my other sister is 15 and not intimidating. They both play hockey and are stronger than me. My family drove off in the direction of the hotel we were staying at. It was an hour or 2 away, so after a while we stopped at another rest stop so me and my siblings could stretch. I had already forgotten about the encounter with the man when I noticed a car pull in. It was a red 4-door sedan. I didn't mind much attention to it at first until I walked into the restroom area. A man followed me in and just sat on the bench like he was waiting for someone. Wanting to avoid eye contact or talking, I pulled my little sister next to me and just spoke about video games with her. I waited until she was done to walk out with her, but my mom walked in and told me to go back to the car. I always avoid talking to strangers, and I get really nervous if someone even says hi to me, so I avoid any contact with people. As I was walking back out, the man followed me. He was around the same height as me. I'm 5'8". He walked next to me and whispered into my ear something along the lines of, "You would look good tied to my bed." I don't completely remember what he said. I just tensed up and ran for my car, jumping into the back seat. I was scared now, but because I was an idiot, I only texted my friend about it. She told me it was some random creep and not to worry about it. I did as she said and forgot about it. I thought that was it for the encounters. Once my family got to our hotel, we checked in and went to the ice rink. Our trip had taken longer than we thought, so we had to be at the rink immediately. I began to forget the man again. It was the start of the second period, and I was sitting outside the actual rink with my sister. I don't bother watching, at least not until now. My sister and I were playing some multiplayer game when a man sat right next to me and asked what I was playing. I got extremely uncomfortable and moved away, only to have him move closer. He began asking me if I had a boyfriend, and I just pointed to my ear to pretend I was deaf. It was pretty stupid looking back, but I had a plan if he believed me. I don't know much sign language, but I know enough to pass a lie. Sadly, he didn't buy it and continued to ask. I stayed silent, ignoring him until he put his cold hand on my thigh. I was wearing leggings, so I felt how cold his hand was. I jumped at it, and he in turn squeezed it. In the game my sister and I were playing, we could message things, so I quickly looked at her and wrote in the chat of our game, "Ask me to go to the bar with you." She looked at me and realized what was going on. She walked over to me and told me she had to go to the bathroom. We hid in the bathroom for a while until the game was over. I didn't see him till the next game, which was the next day. My sister had a fever the day the game was on, so I volunteered to stay with her at our hotel. I only really did it to avoid the man again. It was a few minutes later, and I heard a knock at the door. At this time, my little sister was downstairs getting breakfast from the hotel. I assumed it was her and opened the door. I hated what I saw instead of my sister. It was the same man as before. I was horrified. His face had a horrible grin on it. Before he could say anything, I slammed the door and decided it was a good time to call the police. I was crying at that point, so I sat against the door and called the police. They arrived shortly after, and the man was arrested. It turns out he had been taking pictures of me the whole trip. He had been following me the whole time, even when I was swimming with my siblings. Since then, I never walk alone. I hate it. I just really hope to never see him again.
Terrifying childhood dreams. First off, I'd like to mention that these are experiences I had many years ago, and they were all in dreams, so there's a large chance that not all I remember is completely true. But this is how I remember them happening. Secondly, I'd like to say that the last dream I had in the first story was when I was 9 or 8, and I'm 14 now. So once again, there's a definite portion of that is true, but I'm not sure what really happened and what's my memory being messed up. Thirdly, these are 3 separate experiences, but I can't help but feel that they're all connected in some way. These dreams started when I was only about 6 years old, and they were normally short, strange scenes of me waking up in my room and some gruesome, monstrous creature would either scream, roar, or just completely attack me, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat. As I got older, the dreams got longer, diving more in depth into the story. The first change I remember is sometimes I'd see it get to me and I'd wake up with a weird pain in my chest. Other times, however, I'd escape it, and before anything else would happen, I'd wake up. Every month or so that this went on, the dreams would get longer, and the monstrous creature would always get more gruesome and more scary. One time, I ended up escaping the monster and making it to my basement for safety. After the one time this occurred, it would always be me running to the basement for safety. I would run into the laundry room for safety as well, and my mom would lock the door with me and my sister inside, but the door wasn't able to hold. I remember seeing these bloodied claws ripping through the thick wooden doors, and my mom flipping out, sending me and my sister to hide. After we hid, there'd be a loud scream, followed by silence. Every once in a while, it'd find me, and each time the dream occurred, it was like the creature was learning and understanding how I thought, because it would occur more often. The gruesome creature would sometimes eat my sister in front of me, only to force me to wake up after, and other times it would torture me, waking me only after it seemed satisfied. These dreams occurred through a 3-year period, happening about once a week, maybe 2, or maybe even down to 1 time a month at some points. The last time I ever had a dream like this, it was the exact same thing, except for this time, when it came to take either me or my sister, I stood up to it. I remember its beady, red eyes glaring at me, and its smile with sharp, bloody teeth, as if it was enjoying this. It was about 7 feet tall and had razor-sharp claws, and its body was fat and covered in matted brown fur. The creature laughed, and to this day, it is still one of the most sinister things I think I have ever heard. I had terrible anger issues back then, and so I was about to scream my head off at this. I looked it dead in the eyes and screamed at it to go away, and then I woke up. These dreams never occurred again. The next strange experience was when I was a bit older, maybe 10 or 11. I woke up from a normal sleep, but I didn't feel awake. I think it might have been sleep paralysis, but I'm not sure because I've never experienced this before. I felt a cold tap on my hand, and I had a shiver roll down my spine. Wanting to see what tapped my finger, I rolled my head over. I saw an 8-foot tall shadow crouched over me with long fingers extending. I tried to scream and move, but I couldn't make a noise. I shut my eyes and held them shut, and that's where I think I finally fell asleep. I don't remember anything from after I shut my eyes, so that's where this part ends. The last experience I had was when I was 12 years old. I fell asleep like any ordinary night, but then my dream started. I think it was an out-of-body experience, but I'm not sure. I was standing in my room, but I saw myself in my bed sleeping. I was confused and looked around my room. There were weird, looming shadows, and when I looked back at my body, something was lifting me up. I don't completely remember what it was, but I do remember seeing it carry me over its shoulder into the living room. I followed it, and I saw it throw my body on the couch, and that's when I moved towards myself, only to wake up in the exact spot I had seen myself in my dream. I have no clue how I got there and what happened during this dream, but these are 3 of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me.
The Night in the Forest. So, I used to hear tons of stories about ghosts and also watch a lot of horror movies. But since I had never experienced any ghost encounters, I was a guy like, meh, This ghost stuff is created by humans to make money or movies about it and all other series featuring ghost hunters. One day, me and my 2 friends visited this spooky forest. It wasn't nearby, but we managed to get there just to check it out as we love the natural atmosphere. You know, giving myself some adrenaline and my lungs some fresh air. The time we reached there was about 7 p.m. and it was already getting dark. Just to let you know, there's no light source in the forest except the entrance/exit of the forest area, so it was much darker than we expected. My one friend had his phone and I had mine, so we decided to use them so we could at least see each other. An hour passed by, having conversation and smoking cigarettes. We were sitting under a tree as it was thick enough for us to lean against it. We were having a good time until we started hearing a sound, like 2 rocks smashing into each other, or 1 rock smashing on the ground again and again. We were pretty confused. I told my friends that this must be a cat trying to climb a tree, making the weak branches fall off, and it sounded like a rock. Finally, it stopped, but we were still assuming it was an animal making these sounds. Things went silent for 5 minutes. We started our conversation about this forest atmosphere being so windy and cold. Then suddenly, a rock fell on my friend's head. I wondered how a rock could fall from a tree. Within 4 to 5 seconds of that happening, a big branch from the tree fell on my lap, scaring the shit out of me, and my friend felt what he thought was water drops falling on his neck from up in the tree. How is there still a chance of water dropping down from a tree when the rainy season was already over 2 months ago? This night was clearly not our night, as we heard some of the same sounds of the rocks smash again, but now it sounded like it was getting closer. Immediately, we decided to run out of the forest as quickly as we could. We left the forest safely behind us and went back to our homes. A few days after the incident, one of our friends posted a news story about the same forest. There was a huge tower just like a lighthouse. We had seen that tower from a distance, but didn't get closer as it was a rocky area and there was a chance that one of us might fall off the small cliff. The news post described a boy passing by the tower, and the first thing he saw was a person, but only his head. The post also said the police couldn't find the body, just the head of the man found by this boy while he was passing by. But the question is, what happened to this guy? How in the world could this happen to someone? Could it be the drug addicts who came to this forest to get high? Or is this guy a drug addict getting his head torn off by someone? In the weird experience we had a few days ago in the same forest, was it the spirit of this man coming after us? My questions have yet to be answered, and we have never been back to that forest.
The Grinning Man. I found myself at home one weekend night. My parents were out of town, and I was returning from a canceled sleepover at a friend's house. The lights were on when I got in the door, and I remember getting a phone call from that same friend shortly thereafter, which would end up being the last normal event of the night. My brother was playing video games in the next room, and I could hear him tapping furiously at the video game while I spoke on the cordless phone. I walked around in the living room and ended the phone call in the kitchen when I remember hearing some kind of high-pitched squeal that came from in the house somewhere, and I couldn't place where it was coming from, as it sounded the same in every room I went to investigate. It ended about a minute after it started and was interrupted by the phone ringing, but the phone was not in the kitchen where I left it. It was in the bathroom on the counter in front of the sink. I answered the phone and there was nobody there, so I hung up. It was at that point where I heard a dragging sound, like a large heavy object was being dragged in the attic crawl space above me. I followed the sound as it slowly navigated from room to room and ended up in my parents' bedroom, who still had a waterbed. After the sound made it to the far wall, it stopped and the phone rang again. This time my friend was on the other end of it. I told him what was going on, and he told me to be careful and call the police. After I got off the phone, I laid down on the waterbed and was horrified to find a body-shaped solid object inside the waterbed mattress, so I jumped off. I then heard a knock at the door and answered it quickly, but there was nobody there. It was at that point where my brother called me from his room to check something out that he had just discovered in the game he was playing, and a little more than annoyed at his lack of interest in what was going on, I stormed into his room. There was nobody there. His bed was made and the room spotless. Neither the console nor the TV was on, and the controller was wrapped and unplugged. There was no way he could have hid and cleaned his room in the few seconds it took me to make it from the front door to his room. I had been alone the entire night, hearing for 20 minutes straight my brother playing a game, but he wasn't actually there. The phone rang again, but again it was not where I left it. This time it was resting on the kitchen counter where I originally had left it, so I walked through the entire house to answer it. It was my friend calling again, this time saying that the call was dropped for some reason and that he was calling me back. I explained what just happened, and there was another knock at the door. Since I was standing right next to it, I peeked out the window within 2 seconds of the knocks, and there was nobody there. At this point, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch to make sure I didn't see anyone running away, as I had a large, wide open yard and they didn't have anything to hide behind. I walked into the yard to look around, but didn't find anything. I found myself engaged in several more minutes of talking before my friend got off the line, and it was at that moment when I realized that I had been staring off into space while talking. Where I was looking were two very large, black, reflective eyes looking back at me. Attached to the eyes was a figure that was tall and lanky. It stood only 10 feet or so from me in the shadow cast by the garage from the front door light. The most notable feature it had was an inhumanly large smile, and it was grinning with oily metallic teeth that stretched ear to ear. Despite me staring directly at it for more than 5 minutes, I pretended I didn't notice, and through willpower alone, made it inside the house without running as fast as I could, and instead walked calmly. I remember feeling like if I ran, it would chase me, and somehow knew that it would have caught me easily. I barricaded myself in my room the rest of the night and did not fall asleep until the sun came up the next morning and my parents were home. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and nothing like that has happened since.
Lady of the Hollow. When I was in my early teens, my dad would drag us to Kentucky every chance he got. 10 hours each way made most of our trip driving. Finally, we would arrive at Aunt Lanny's home. God, I loved her. She had 9 kids. My cousin Ronnie decided that he would tell us about an urban legend called the Devil Lady of Trace Licking Hollow, or Holler as he liked to pronounce it. Ronnie shared with us the following. Up on the outer ridge of this hollow, way above the tree line, lived a bitter old woman who hated everyone and everything. She was so full of hate that she started doing things to her neighbors. She took people's pets. She would pass a neighbor as they were walking beside the road, and she would try to take a swipe at them. As this woman got older, she started looking into people's windows, scaring everyone, but she would always disappear by the time any of the family would come out of their house looking for her. Finally, one family had enough. The father grabbed his hunting rifle and made the hike up to the ridge where the old lady lived. When he entered her property, something wasn't right. It was just too quiet. Then he saw her laying out in the middle of a small garden, dead. Dead for a very long time. How could she still be terrorizing the whole hillside? He also told me to stay away from the windows in the deepest part of the night. I said okay, thinking this was just a ploy to get me to go to bed, but you see, I'm a night owl. My mother says I have been since I was very young. So I walked upstairs and got into bed, but I couldn't sleep, so I started reading a book that I had brought with me. The last thing I remember were the chimes of a clock at around 3. I turned over and looked towards the window, and I froze there. In the window in the bedroom was the most hideous face I have ever seen. Matted long hair, skin so thin that some was there and some just wasn't. Red eyes and yellow teeth, and on this hag's head were horns. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I threw the blankets over my head and just kept praying the old hag would go away. The next morning I came down for breakfast and my aunt looked at me and said, "How did you sleep?" I said, "Okay, I guess." And when my aunt left the room, my cousin Ronnie looks at me and says, "She always knows what's going on in her holler."
Maple Crest Demon. This is not something that happened to me, but to my husband and his mother when he was about 10 years old. We will call him Brett. His mother, we will call Kim. And my brother-in-law, we will call him Mike. My husband moved around a lot when he was growing up. Kim was a single mother who left an alcoholic and abusive husband. Mike was an introvert. And my husband Brett was an outgoing, all-American boy who always had to be doing something. They lived in 5 different homes and apartments in the same city, but the one mentioned most is a 2-story home for rent on Maple Crest Drive. A week after they moved in, small things started to happen. Things would get moved, water in the sinks would start running, and the lights would flicker on and off. They had electricians come in, plumbers, etc. They never found anything wrong. Things went on this odd way for a while, but then more started happening. They would hear stomping on the stairs, appliances coming on by themselves, and shadows moving down the hall, passing their bedroom doors. Then, about 6 months from the time that they moved in, the shadows started coming into the bedrooms. Brett often woke to something moving in the corner of his room. He said one night he was sleeping with his hand over the bed and something bit him. He would also hear whispers, but then they did not come in clear enough for him to understand. Though the scariest things would happen to Kim. One night, she woke up feeling like she was being choked, but there was no one else in the room. She would be cleaning and something would pull her hair hard. But what she says is the scariest night was the night she was dragged down the hallway and down the stairs. Everyone thought she was crazy. They did not see the scratches or the bruises or the mental strain Kim was going through. She went to the library and got this book on the paranormal. The book instructed us to put flour or baby powder on the floor. The first night, nothing happened, but the second night, there were prints in the flour. They looked like what a gorilla's fist looked like if you made it longer and put talons on the end. The next morning, they packed up their bags and moved into an abused women's shelter. They never figured out what it was, just that it terrorized Kim and Brett, but it left Mike alone.
I think I have a Bigfoot problem. During the days, we take our 2 dogs outside to their kennels so they can get out of the house for a while and run and play and such. These are not small dogs. One is a black lab husky mix, and the other one is a full-blooded Staffordshire Terrier, a pit bull. The kennels are placed at the edge of the yard near the woods. These woods are big, large enough to take a day to go hiking through them. Lately, when it gets dark, the dogs seem on edge. They will bark and whine toward the house to come in. At first, I just figured they wanted to get back into the house, but now I'm thinking they're actually scared. 3 nights ago, when I went in to get them, it was already dark, but we have a security light, so it isn't pitch black or anything. I got to the front of the first kennel and noticed both dogs were being quiet. They always bark at me excitedly when I go to get them, but they were dead silent. This weirded me out a little, but not to the point of being scared. I will admit that there was a certain uneasiness in the air though, something I can't explain, but it sort of felt electric, like I was about to be shocked. The longer I was there, the more uneasy I felt. I started getting the first dog, the lab, out and heard a heavy snap in the woods near the kennels. I froze, the dogs froze. By this time, I was so on edge that if someone had spoken, I would have jumped, screamed, and possibly ran. The creepy feeling in the air just kept getting thicker. The lab had her bushy tail stuffed underneath her and she was whining. This didn't make me feel any better. The pit bull was as far away from the woods as she could get, whimpering for me to come get her. I can only take one dog in at a time because they get too excited and will sometimes try to fight, so I avoid that at all costs. I felt so bad leaving the pitty there by herself, but I had to do it. As I walked away, she barked this high-pitched, whining type of bark at me that I have never heard her do before. The lab couldn't get to the house quick enough. I went back for the other one and dreaded every step as her door is right at the base of the woods. I would have to turn my back to the woods to open her door and get her out. The air felt heavy and stale with an unpleasant smell like a dead skunk as I approached the kennel. Another snap and I was about ready to run for it, but I didn't want to leave my dog, who had her head down defensively facing the woods. I could barely make it. To be honest, it felt like trying to walk through water. I was terrified by the time I reached the door. I heard heavy breathing behind me as I got my dog out. She was scared too, but started growling behind me. I was frozen in place. The breathing continued for a minute before I heard steps coming toward us. We both took off at the same time. A terrifying scream came out of the base of the woods. I didn't dare look back, I just ran. My pity pulled me all the way back to the house. I got in, flipped off all the lights, and stared out the window at the woods. I could see something moving slightly, but just out of the light. It moved back and forth for about 5 minutes, then disappeared. It took me forever to fall asleep that night because I was so scared that every little noise freaked me out. The next night, I went to get the dogs earlier, right around dusk. I thought all was good until I was getting my pity out. A huge snapping sound, like a tree branch had just been snapped in half, rang out. It sounded pretty far away, so I just hurriedly got my dog and started toward the house. A few steps away from the kennel, I heard something big start charging toward me from inside the woods. We ran again, and it appeared to follow for so long, then retreated back. Now every night since then, I hear sounds coming out of the woods like branches breaking and being thrown around, knocking on trees, and roaring. I am absolutely terrified. I no longer even take my dogs down. I just take them for walks during the day and make sure we are all in before dusk. I don't know what to do. I'm thinking about buying a gun, but I'm not sure it would help.
All right, and that's going to end the podcast for the night. If you have any ideas or want your story featured on the show, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. As always, thanks for listening.
And
Good night.